Welcome to another Drink with John. This time I am joined by my good friend, Bishop Matthew Kukah, the Bishop of the Diocese of Sokoto in the far north of Nigeria. Bishop Matthew, welcome to a Drink with John. May I toast you?
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much.
Great pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure is mine.
The problem with this segment is that I could spend all of our time doing nothing other than introducing you. By the way, I watched this panel that you moderated at a conference the other day. Okay, it takes most people 5 minutes to introduce the speaker. I think we were a good 40 minutes into the thing before you were done. But you're great. Okay, sometimes I think you missed your vocation. Okay, I mean, you know, of course, you have a very priestly heart and you're a magnificent bishop. But I think you could have been a late night comedian if you had really wanted to, because you're hilarious. But anyway, Bishop Matthew is a scholar. He's written widely on church and state, church and society in Africa, the evolution of democracy, the emergence of democracy, and the ongoing struggle to build genuinely democratic societies in Africa. He is also an expert on the Christian-Islamic relationship. In fact, the diocese you lead is in one of the most heavily Muslim corners of Nigeria. You have long-time experience in that. You were widely sought after as a speaker, as a commentator. You are, I guess, in addition to being a bishop, what we in the West would call a public intellectual. I've never quite known what that meant, but whatever it is, you're it. And in addition to that, just one of the most genuinely kind and generous, and one of the best friends you'll ever have. So that's all I'm going to do. I could do much more, but that's it. Bishop Matthew Kukah. So Bishop, we find ourselves together here in Rome at this major summit on Africa being sponsored by the Center for Ethics and Culture of the University of Notre Dame at Notre Dame's Global Gateway Center. This meeting brings together a cross-section of bishops and theologians and clergy and religious and laity and so on to talk about the issues facing the church in Africa and its future. One of those issues is quite clearly the relationship with Islam. And nowhere is that more true, I suppose, than in Nigeria. Because Nigeria is the world's largest mixed Muslim-Christian nation. You've got a population around 200 million. And I know there's a debate over exact counts, but it's roughly 50-50 Christian-Muslim. And so you are fated, in effect, to live together in Nigeria. In fact, when I went to Kaduna a decade and a half ago, I met an imam there who told me that Nigeria is like the Vatican and Saudi Arabia all rolled up into one, right? I mean, you've got this vibrant Christian culture and this vibrant Islamic culture, and you've been on the front lines. Now, in the West, what we hear about Christian-Muslim relations in Nigeria is almost exclusively Boko Haram, right? And terrorism and violence. And that is very much part of the story. It is ineradicably part of the story. But I know you well enough to know that you will insist it is not the whole story. So tell us what we're missing in terms of understanding how Christians and Muslims relate in Africa and specifically in Nigeria.
Well, thank you very much, John. And as I always say to you, you're extremely generous with your comments and observations. But look, I mean, what you say just doesn't even come anywhere close to what Nigeria is. It's an extraordinary country. Mm-hmm. And I've often said jokingly that after what we've gone through, Nigeria, it's like a Catholic marriage. You may not be happy, but you won't break up. So when people talk about the possibilities of Nigeria, I look at it at a slightly different dimension. You know, what is it that has kept that country together? Because it's got every reason not to be together, but it's held on. And that significance is often lost on people. We've got something that you can't find in the entire Middle East. We've got something you cannot find anywhere else in the world. That is even the possibility of a 50-50 percentage presence of Christians and Muslims.
Yeah, it's unique in the world.
It's unique.
Yeah.
So, and along with that uniqueness comes the difficulty of making bricks without straw. Now, what I mean is, against the backdrop of a very dysfunctional state, a very convoluted state that has antecedents of colonialism and all the layers of distortions and contradictions and so on and so forth. And the British trying to weld this nation together. And evidence now beginning to emerge that actually the British probably did not even have the best of intentions in terms of the possibility of this country holding together. We fought a civil war, fine. But again, just like what you wouldn't find in other countries. Shortly after that civil war, less than 10 years, an Igbo man becomes the vice president of Nigeria. So it's this resilience that is often missing. Now, of course,
and just for people who aren't familiar with Nigeria, what's the significance of an Igbo man becoming the vice president?
Because the Igbos were the ones who went to war. They rebelled against Nigeria, and we fought almost a 3-year civil war.
And they were, in effect, the vanquished.
They were the vanquished.
And yet, shortly after that,
exactly.
One of them becomes...
And, the civil war ended in 1970. By 1979, an Igbo man is the vice president of Nigeria. It's not a small achievement.
To put this in an American context, it would be a bit like as if a senator in the Confederacy became the vice president of the United States shortly after the Civil War. Right?
Absolutely. And look how long it's taken the United States. So,
yeah.
As I said, a lot of these things are often lost. The second problem is that because of the ideology of Islam and its obsession with state and power, and the peculiar nature of Nigeria's history, especially the Muslim community in northern Nigeria, who ran a state from 1804 to 1903, when the British conquered that state. Now, perceptions of historical injustices and so on and so forth, how the Muslims see and the narrative about the experience with that colonial state, the allegations of treachery and the possibility that because the missionaries came with white skin, right, as well as, so there was the perception, and that perception is still extant today, that people think Christianity was just the spiritual arm of the colonial state.
Right.
We've had great difficulties trying to walk out of those shadows. Unfortunately, one of the tragedies, and what has really not happened in Nigeria, just like other parts of Africa, we've never had a sense of urgency about creating national cohesion and then working through constitutional rule to bring that about. The military Nigeria became independent on the 1st of October 1960. Almost 30, 40 of those years were chewed up by the military, who staged all kinds of coups and so on and so forth. So, and a lot of that also delayed the project of democracy. So had we not had military rule in Nigeria, by now, we would have been able to move forward very quickly to deal with issues of national integration. Because military rule, to the extent that almost all the beneficiaries of military rule were the northern Muslim elite.
Can I just interrupt you really quickly? Of course, I asked you a question about Christian-Muslim relations.
Right.
And you're talking about the delayed project of building democracy. The reason you're talking about that, just so people, and I know you're thinking well enough to know, is because in your view, to overcome the possibility, the ever-present possibility of communal and sectarian tensions, whether they're along Christian-Muslim lines or tribal lines or anything else, what is necessary is to build a truly democratic state in which everyone feels that they are equal stakeholders. So in other words, your answer to Christian-Muslim tension is, let's build a genuine democracy.
Absolutely. And what people call Christian-Muslim conflict, there's nothing inevitable about that. I think the Western media constructed this and it's become popular. It's also even popular in Nigeria. But I have said over a 20, 30-year period, there's nothing like a conflict between Christians and Muslims. Because don't forget, we've never had a crisis start from a church or from a mosque. We've never had a situation in which Muslims said you can't read the Bible or you can't read the Quran. No. The same Muslims and Christians are in the bureaucracy, they're in the army, they're in other arms of government. What do we really call Christian and Muslim violence and crisis in Nigeria is the failure of law and order. These are, because when you go back and read the stories after these crises have taken place, it's often people were arguing in the market, or it's often there were debates over boundaries of land or whatever. So a lot of the issues that have led to violence have had very, very little to do with religion per se.
Okay, but can I just challenge you in that slightly?
Yes.
My colleague Ines San Martin were in Nigeria a year and a half or so ago. One of the places we went was St. Teresa's Parish, about an hour outside of Abuja, the national capital, which of course was the site of that bomb attack on Christmas Day in 2011. we met with about 50 of the survivors of that attack, all of whom had lost family members. And we asked them this question too. Okay, do you think in other words, was this a religious attack? Okay, and widely attributed to Boko Haram, of course. So do you perceive this as a religious, or is it political? Is it something else? To a person, those people said that they believed it was a religious attack. They said they bombed us in a church on Christmas Day. And then when they were taking credit for it, they were talking about their great victory over the infidels. How is that not, in their view, that was the question they would ask, how is that not a religious attack? So when you hear that kind of thing, what do you say?
Well, you know, what we don't do in Nigeria, we don't do crime scene investigation. We never return to the scene of the crime. If you go back to Madala and see what really happened, a bit of it is slightly different from the popular narrative. It's not as, because if that vehicle could easily have driven right into the church, it's not where it happened. But to answer your question, the man who was actually the security gentleman protecting that church, incidentally, was a Muslim. So, you know, the Nigerian thing is so intricate.
Yeah.
But because the Christian-Muslim divide has become the natural fault line, it's like, and of course, you know, the West tends to have a binary view of conflict in Africa. It's either tribes or it is religion.
Right.
And it saves us the problem of answering the difficult questions.
Right.
So for me, the issues are much more than that. And my argument is that what we do for like Cardinal Onayakan would say, what we do for the remaining 360 days of the year, our celebrations, our being in the market together, our being in the offices together, our being in the same political parties and so on, doesn't suggest that we can come to the same kind of conclusion. Simple example, we have a president now in Nigeria, General Buhari, who tried to be president at least 3 different times and couldn't make it.
Right.
But the election that he finally won, the chairman of the party is a communion receiving Catholic.
In fact, we have spoken to Cardinal Onayakan during this conference, and he openly and explicitly said he voted for Buhari.
Well, I didn't vote for Buhari because I didn't vote for anybody. The reason was I had a vote.
No, my point is, it's not like the politics broke along Christian-Muslim lines.
Exactly. So it is that we're not doing much, one, to highlight the realities around which Nigerians live, and that fixing Nigeria is actually what should be the most important project. And what we're witnessing is the driver sleeping on the steering. Because if we're able to resolve the issues of human integrity, jobs, family security, and so on and so forth, we will not be having this conversation. Because guess what? I live in Sokoto. I go to Sokoto with my full regalia every day that I have to travel. I arrive at the airport. The kids who pick my bags, they're Muslims. And let me tell you something. And I don't know whether I mentioned it to you the other day. And because it's very important that we were at the airport lounge. Somebody walks up to me and introduces himself and says, oh, then he introduces me to his friend. This is the Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Sokoto. You know, another Muslim barges into our conversation and says, no, don't be calling him Catholic Bishop. You know, he is our bishop in Sokoto. You know, we say when you call him Catholic, you eliminate us, but he's our bishop.
Yeah.
So these are the things that what I personally experience in Nigeria has very, very little to do with the popular narrative about Christian and Muslims. The Sultan of Sokoto is the highest ranking Muslim. And I walk into his house at 10 o'clock at night, it's not a problem. I walk into his house at 7 o'clock, I don't have to tell him I'm coming to dinner, I just turn up. And he is disappointed if by 11 p.m. I tell him I have to go.
Yeah.
You know, this is true. And
well, if I were having dinner with you, I'd be disappointed if you took off at 11 o'clock too. Just so, it's not just a Muslim thing. Is
right,
what I'm
but
saying.
as I said, it's an exciting country, and I hope and pray that sooner than later we can turn the corner and begin to talk about human things as opposed to the inevitable tension between.
Okay, let me ask you this. You're painting an essentially optimistic picture about the possibility of Christian. I mean, your point simply is that Christians and Muslims in Nigeria already do get along routinely far more than is understood. And the root problems here aren't religious. They are a dysfunctional state, and they're the absence of real democracy. Okay, I take all that on board. Is the situation in Nigeria just so unique and so unrepeatable that it's essentially sui generis? Or are there lessons Nigeria can offer the rest of the world about how Christians and Muslims can build a future together?
Well, there are, but I think we haven't got into that yet, because we are to sort ourselves out, which is that the reason why, I mean, it's not as if you come to Nigeria and you've been, it's not as if there is electricity on the Muslim side and there isn't on the Christian side.
Right, no, absolutely.
It's not as if there's running water on the other side and there isn't on the other. So the inability of the state to equitably distribute resources that are so hugely available, for me, to the extent that we haven't gotten to that point yet, the ordinary person within Africa still sees Nigeria as a problem. Despite the fact that Nigeria has held the African continent together, we were literally on the front seat in fighting against apartheid. We brought peace to Sierra Leone, to Liberia, and so on. But we've not been able to earn the respect that is commensurate with our contribution, largely because we've got a lot of work that we haven't done, which is that we require a credible leadership that has the honesty, the commitment to building a fair society. And I think this is where, in my view, the Catholic Church needs to buckle up and do much more than it has done, much more than it is doing.
For example?
Well, we need to come to the starting points of politics, and I don't think we should be talking of church from the point of view of bishop and cardinal and parish priest and so on. We should be talking about leadership recruitment, that is, training our people for a concrete role in public life. We have not been very successful in doing that. We haven't taken it up as a project yet, but I think there is a sense of urgency about that.
You sense that, and in other words, you're not just speaking for yourself here, but you think in the church in Nigeria today, there is a sense of urgency about trying to raise up a new generation that can change the political game?
Well, generally, yes, but I run a diocese and I have my own personal convictions. And a lot of that is also seen in my decision to set up the Cuca Center, which deals with issues of public policy, issues of politics, because I'm interested in ensuring that the Catholic voice...
And put in a plug for your center here a little bit. So this is the Cuca Center, which you created when?
3 years ago.
And it is devoted to?
Public policy, religion, faith, and what we do is, my interest, because I spent 10 years in the Secretariat.
Do you have a website?
Sorry?
Do you have a
we
website?
Do have a website.
What's the address?
The Cuca Center at www.thecucacenter.org. Yes.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. That is www.cucacenter, K-U-K-A-H, center. Do you spell that the British or the American way? Is it R-E or E-R?
R-E.
You guys, it's the legacy of colonialism. Come on, you need to get rid of that. Cuca Center, spelled the Brit way, .org. Look it up. Because aside from the activities of the center, I think, if I'm not wrong, there are also some of your writings there, and so.
Yes, and the great thing about the center is, somebody said to me, and it was an American friend of mine, who says, "Look, you need to set this up because you've got the power of someone." That was the way he put it to me. He said, "Almost everybody you call in Nigeria will come." And with a sense of humility, I'm quite pleased about that, because when we decided to present the concept paper, I invited the president then, President Jonathan, and he physically came. And it's actually a result of my experience with public life in Nigeria, having served in about 3 or 4 different presidential initiatives. This is what has given me a sense of urgency, but also a feeling that the doors may be closed, but they are not locked. There are a lot of things we can do to improve the quality of public policy, but also to make sure that the moral voice of the church gets heard, because people do take the Catholic Church very, very seriously.
Yeah. Speaking of politics, and unfortunately we're running out of time, but before we get done, there are 2 other questions I want to ask you that I'm just fascinated by, to hear your answer in particular. First, what would your read be on how the typical African or the typical Nigerian, because it's the country you know best, what would they think of our new president of the United States, Donald Trump?
It's very interesting. I wasn't sure, I really was not too sure, but I really didn't mind if Donald Trump won the election at another level. Because, and I think why he became popular in Nigeria was largely...
Wait, you're saying he's popular in
Oh,
Nigeria?
absolutely. Absolutely. Especially within the Christian community for reasons of, I think you're talking of Nigeria after Boko Haram.
Yeah, so this is because he stands up to Muslims?
I think those are the issues. Those are some of the issues. And, many people had felt beaten, and we also felt that the moral issues were not being addressed. It's not as if I expect Donald Trump to change the world, but hey, at another level, there was a side of me that really wanted Hillary Clinton to win because I thought women deserve a fair shot, especially given what was happening to them in other parts of the world where they had managed to climb the ladder of power. Right. Brazil, South Korea, and Germany. Well, no, I mean, the guys in Germany, Merkel is still standing. But,
yeah, exactly.
But the woman in Brazil has been pushed off.
That's true.
The one in South Korea has been impeached. The one in Argentina has been pulled out for trial and so on. So there was a side of me that, and of course, my great admiration for my man, Bill Clinton. So I really wanted Hillary to win at another level. But hey, I don't have a vote in the United States, so...
Okay, but you're saying that for, like, just if I took a poll among Christians in particular in Nigeria, Donald Trump would do pretty well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, and another question I wanted to ask you, one of the early moves of the Trump administration, of course, was to overhaul America's policy towards admission of refugees. And to put a temporary ban on virtually all refugee admissions while new security measures are put into place, and then particular restrictions on some majority Muslim nations. How did that move play among your Muslim friends in Nigeria? What do they think of Donald Trump?
Well, I think the Muslims substantially hold him in contempt. They probably, and for reasons quite obvious. I think personally, were it not for the way people felt about Nigeria after Boko Haram and what was happening, global terrorism and so on and so forth, beyond that, I personally I don't have much affection at the social level in terms of dealing with the social issues, which is what you're saying about the refugees. Everything Donald Trump stands for, I'm against it. I think it's a question of my enemy's enemy is my friend, but also I don't couch my relationship with Muslims in that sense. But I can understand the frustration that would have driven people to that,
Although, I mean, I have to say, and this is a conversation for another time, but I understand why you are so eager to make the argument that there isn't really a Christian-Muslim conflict in Nigeria, that's a cover for other things. But I mean, listening to you talk, look, I mean, you just told me that Donald Trump is pretty popular among the Christians and the Muslims hold him in contempt. I mean, it does sound to me like there's a certain divide.
No, I mean, it's like black and white. I mean, the divides are there, but it depends on whether you instrumentalize them.
I understand what you're saying.
So, yeah, I mean...
And of course, this is a sort of chicken and egg thing, right?
Yes.
I mean, what comes first? I mean, I think people are sometimes taught to perceive a religious divide, even though what they don't understand is they're actually being driven into that attitude by a cocktail of other forces that have nothing to do with it.
And let me give you an example, a very nice example. Our former president, Obasanjo, told me a very interesting story. Nigeria was playing one of these games in the World Cup.
Right.
And whenever Nigeria is not doing so well, the supporters resort to one of these Christian, appeals to Jesus.
Yeah.
And somehow it's worked severally. Let me put it that way. So one of these days, they take up one of these Jesus songs and, Jesus, give us some gold or whatever. And a goal was scored. And he said all of them broke into celebration. And his chief of staff, who is a Muslim, started celebrating. And he held him back. He said, listen, this goal was scored in the name of Jesus. Why are you celebrating? And the guy says to him, listen, once a goal has been scored, we're all Christians. Plus, I saw this in Notre Dame. 3 or so years ago. Paulinus took me to a football game. I'd never seen one in my life, but by the time it was over, I fell in love with the game. But the president of Notre Dame, it was hilarious. When Notre Dame was almost losing the match, I forget his name. Now, he works in the office of the president, but he's a hilarious guy. He says to me, Bishop, please pray. But you know what? Now let's pray to our Blessed Mother. Jesus doesn't have time for these things now. Mothers have time. So And it was, I saw the board, there were all these things about the Blessed Virgin Mary and so on and so forth. This is Notre Dame. So miraculously, they won the match. And
They're still not getting it. They won the game.
I'm sorry, they won. They won the game, and I'll never forget it. But I told Paulinos, I said, listen, they were going to play the finals in California or someplace. So I said, look, if you guys want to win this game, fly me in to watch it. Otherwise,
To pray over it?
yeah, but they didn't fly me in, and they lost so badly.
So there you go. Okay, before you go, you mentioned your good friend Bill Clinton. Have you ever heard the story about Bill Clinton and John Paul II in 1993?
No.
Okay, so John Paul in 1993 came to the United States for World Youth Day, right? Bill Clinton is in his first term, right? World Youth Day was in Denver, so Clinton flies out to Denver, okay? And then I can't remember if he came to the Sunday Mass or if it was the Friday night vigil, but in any event, he shows up for one of the events, right? And he's watching this huge crowd of people, it's 500,000 people, okay, who are totally in love with John Paul, just hanging on his every word, screaming their heads off at his every move, right? John Paul II, we love you, right? You remember, right? And so somebody asked Clinton, so what do you think of him? You know what Clinton's answer was?
No.
I'd sure as hell hate to have to run against him for mayor.
No, I love Bill Clinton.
And you also love John Paul.
He
was your BFF. All right, that's a conversation for another time. We have been talking with Bishop Matthew Kukah of the Diocese of Sokoto in Nigeria, one of the cream of the crop of the Catholic episcopacy in Africa. Good friend of Crux, good friend of mine. Bishop Matthew, can I toast you again? Thank you for doing this.
And thanks for paying for this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a big spender. So stay with us on Crux. We will have more installments of A Drink with John to come. Until then, we will talk to you next time.